Yes, and I will.
And then we'll have the audio. We're good.
Violate every rule of computer security.
Yeah. Okay, says we are streaming on YouTube.
Okay. Are we recording too? All right. Good morning. It's 9 a.m. Tuesday, August 27th, or August 2017. Is that what I said? 17th. Woo. I'd like to call this Personnel Committee meeting to order and acknowledge that the press and public have been duly notified in accordance with the Freedom of Information Act. Our first order of business is approval of previous meetings minutes.
So moved. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Next up, citizen comments. Anybody signed up?
No, sir.
Nobody in the audience. Moving along to old business. We've got two items. First up is the update on the wage and compensation analysis report. And I believe the HR officer, Janice, has passed out some information to committee members. So I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you. Good morning.
Good morning.
I'm going to start off with the options for the solution and how we can pick one of these options to be able to roll out the best plan going forward. So I'll start off with the first one.
Can I just pause for anybody who's watching this live or later? This information right now is kind of in process. It's not.
Correct.
So in terms of what's going to be made available to the public, can you just, Desiree or Janice, really quickly say, here's when and what's going to be made available? Because we're obviously looking at stuff that's not visible to everybody.
Well, we're not sure yet exactly when it's going to be made available. What you have in front of you is the description of different implementation options. We'll be talking through the description, pros and cons for each one. This is, again, like you said, still in process. We need to give some feedback back to the consultants about what kind of implementation option we want to pursue so that they can build it into a phased implementation plan. Rather than doing all of these options, we want to give feedback, maybe 2 or 3 tops that we want to see played out and forecasted for the next few years. So yeah, this is not yet public. This is still a work in progress, but this is just theoretically what these options are and what they look like. They don't have any numbers associated with them. We'll give you all some ranges of where they are right now. But like we discussed in the previous meeting, some of the positions are still being looked at. Some of the positions are, we're looking at the different grades that they were assigned as part of the job assessment tool. We started meeting with the department heads and supervisors, or second in command, those that have make hiring decisions, going through the same discussion and getting feedback from them. We started yesterday we had yesterday a meeting with the police department. We have fire department on Wednesday, and then the other departments. We're focusing on police and fire, biggest departments. And based on the feedback from council, it'll be the first 2 departments that we consider for an implementation phase. So yeah, still in progress. There's nothing confidential necessarily about, what we have here, but it's something that we're sharing and we're just working through at this point.
Thank you.
So just to follow up with Desiree said, the biggest piece is making sure that the data is accurate. Garbage in, garbage out is not what we want. So I'm taking my due diligence and making sure that everyone's rate of pay is accurate, that we've got them in the right grade alignment for that position, and making sure that we know how they got to those ranges for those grades. What we found is that the grade system isn't just based on the JAT scoring that we worked on early back in May. It's a combination of a lot of things out there to include the market, other job areas, what the pay scale looks for those in the marketplace as well. So that we were going back through again, we kind of spotted a few that we felt was not accurate. So we'll be still working on those and making sure that we have the information correct.
And then also another point before we kind of go through each option, the adjustment is going to depend on the solution that we pick. So that's why the numbers are still, depend on, really where we want to go. So we'll start with each option one by one and kind of give you some highlights, pros and cons, things to consider. And then if you all have any questions, hopefully we can answer them. If not, we'll go back and you know, have a continual dialogue with Evergreen.
So the first one is, they of course have set the range, a minimum, a minimum, midpoint and a high for each position. So the first one would be bring everyone to that minimum. If they're already past that minimum, there would be no adjustment to their salary. It's kind of a basic one, and it really has not a super impact overall. It just kind of brings everyone up to a minimum of the market that's out there.
John, if I may.
Please.
Yeah.
I mean, do we know what the number or volume of employees that each one of these will?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, and we
Yes.
have that number. We have categorized all employees in 3 categories. One is general,
Mhm.
another one is fire, and another one is police. So
Okay.
admin, even in the police and fire, admin, non-certified officers would fall into the general category,
Mhm.
same as city hall, building, rec, and public works.
Okay.
And we have, depending on each of these options, they have provided to us based on the numbers that we have today, which may change. We have how many employees in each department it would impact
Okay.
and the total number.
Perfect. Okay.
This first option, bringing employee salaries to the new minimum, would have a financial impact based on the numbers we have today between $70,000 and $80,000.
Okay.
That's the range that, just so that you have an
Mhm.
idea of what we're talking
That's awesome.
about
Yep,
for
perfect.
this.
Thank you.
So the next 2 is kind of a combo type of looking at it. So the current range penetration and the current range penetration looking at the midpoint. So the first one is a really big impact, taking the full range of their position and going up to, for example, it says in here, when an individual is at 40% of the current range, he or she will be brought to 40% of the recommended range. So that range, what we're saying, could go to the high end penetration based on years of service, where they have performed, and what their current dollar amount is looking at today. So we have people who have had larger merit increases than others based on job performances. So that impact has a higher impact to us in giving them the high end of the scale going forward. It would start them at the higher end. The second option of the same kind of thought process is capping it at the midpoint of their range. So if they were at, 40%, needed 40% to go to the midpoint, that they would increase. But if it was, they only needed 10%, they would only get 10% to get to the mid-range of this scale.
So you're basically assigning each person where they are in the current range. You're picking them up and putting it at that same relative location in the new range.
Mhm.
But then you have an option that covers everybody regardless of where they would fall within the minimum, mid, and high. And then the second option is it caps it at midpoint. So if you're above midpoint in the new range, you wouldn't be in the old range or new range, you wouldn't be receiving an
So,
adjustment.
So Janice, if you were to look at this philosophically and separate police and fire from the balance of employees, because I had a brief conversation with Desiree, your overall impact on an annualized basis would be probably a lot lower than taking the entire employee population on this plan, right?
Right. So, those are the things that we have to look at. We can pick and choose multiple choices on how we want to do this across the board. So we may say police, we may pick option, cap to the midpoint. And fire, we may say, okay, let's just cap, do the penetration. And general, we might just do bring to minimum. Those are the things that we need to look at and get the input from Evergreen. We've gotten some input on these plans as we've talked with them already, just to educate us more. So it can be a hodgepodge, or you can pick
Yeah, and I'm
one.
trying to hopefully state what I'm trying to say correctly. I think we know we have to address police and fire,
Exactly.
right? and probably should fairly aggressively address police and fire. We probably don't have the same need for aggressiveness across the board. However, personally, and I'll say it, I believe everybody should be raised to a minimum, right? So I'm kind of going through my mind of something that is logical and probably financially sound in terms of where we head with this.
Certainly a possibility.
Okay.
We've talked about that internally. We can pick a more aggressive penetration solution for certain departments. I think that with
Okay.
police and fire, we can make an argument that it's where we have the most turnover, costs for recruitment are higher.
And training.
And frankly, we're seeing nationally more
Yeah.
issues, getting people to work in these. To recruit them. So certainly a possibility, not unlike other communities have done. We can treat departments differently, still being fair and being,
Yeah.
what I'm looking for is a plan that's sustainable for years to come.
Thank you.
So if you flip the pages over here, and you may not spend as much time on they all are based on tenure, years of service. And having a conversation with Evergreen, we kind of found that this does not really suit us well. So for example, I have two employees, same year tenure. One's making a little bit more money than the other one because of job performance. So if we were to use a tenure rollout, that job performance history would go away. It would just do it on years of service. Another example is I have someone who got hired who had 15 years of experience in their previous position in another city and has only worked here for 4 years. That tenure would hurt him in that case, in this scenario, because we started him at a higher rate of pay because of that experience that he brought to us. So they really talked us out of the tenure because of those things that I was noticing. So I was going, okay, XYZ employee and ABC employee work the same amount, but I was finding them not to come in relation to each other. Merit was a big portion of that. But if I looked at the tenure options, they were coming in line to be the same salary. So the history, the differential would go away.
We would be basically, recognizing or giving an advantage to somebody who may have been here for, the same amount of years, but hasn't gone above and beyond, didn't get the same merit increase as somebody else, same experience, same level, years, and they would be situated in the same step pay plan.
I think we're
Kind of
probably good to
ignoring
take your
all that.
recommendations.
I assume this is about right sizing versus moving forward, right? Because we talked about not doing that.
Correct.
This is about
Yeah.
step one, not ongoing. So,
Moving forward, we would have guidelines here for hiring, depending on years of experience and where you should locate people within either the step plan or the range based on the
Right.
experience and years of service. So the idea is once this is adopted and implemented, we will not have an issue of having to bring people in, because they're lower, they're not compensated properly. One thing that I wanted to mention that we've been discussing with Evergreen is the cost of living adjustment. So y'all recall that for years, the city had a combination of cost of living and then a performance increase. How do we make sure that this project, this report, these recommendations are sustainable? And one of the recommendations that they said is rather than doing it every year, which I think we've gone through and said, well, it may not be affordable for the city in the long run to do that, plus a merit increase. It's something that we should consider doing maybe every 3 years, every 4 years. We go back, have an average of what the cost of living increase has been for the past 3 years, if that's what we decide. And then at that point, make adjustments not only to salaries, but also to the job range, the wage ranges and the step plan based on that. That is an option that's, how other communities treat it, just so that you can still recognize cost of living increases and make sure that your plan is not going to be outdated in the next 5 to 6 years.
Just maybe a nit to that. So when we do this, we will implement in this calendar year, is the plan, right? Because for what it's worth, as the only Social Security ward sitting up here, they're looking at 6% increases this year, right? So as we do this, we should be within whatever that CPI or range is as we implement, and not look at, well, in January, Social Security recipients are getting 6%. Therefore, we're looking at another adjustment. We should do what we do at the range, and to your point, Desiree, if it's 3 years or whatever that is, move forward from that. Because this year is going to be an anomaly, no matter what.
Yeah. And that'll be part of the compensation philosophy. Y'all recall having a conversation with Nancy back in, when we had the budget workshop about what the compensation philosophy will be moving forward, something that, we can maintain as a policy. Certainly different councils could adjust it and change it, but creating a set policy that gives guidance to the staff moving forward, that's based on,
And sets expectations.
Yeah. Just one comment. I like the every 3 years. And the reason why is the challenge we had with annual is that it was an expectation and reasonable expectation on the part of the employees, because it was so regular. And if there was to be a budget crisis, if there was an issue with budget, then our team is left really upset because, well, the city couldn't afford the cost of living increase, but they're like, but this is built in every year. When it's every 3 years, and the city has the chance to look back and say, what's happened to inflation and to the cost of consumer goods over 3 years? Is this needed? It's a little bit, I think, easier pill to swallow, and it's a less, if for some reason, I think the only reason you wouldn't do that is if we had an issue with budget. If there was, hey, we can't meet this. If we see, hey, this has been a real impact to cost of living, that's a real thing that's measurable, then obviously everyone up here would want to support our staff with giving that, unless we were having a hardship in the city. So I think that's where the 3 years to me is a good starting point. There's no perfect way to do this, but.
And I would also think, say that the compensation philosophy should include some type of, explanation that, this is going to be the philosophy. However, cases of extreme hardship, it's going to be evaluated differently. But the expectation would be that as long as our forecasts, work well, then, this is what we're going to be implementing.
And John, I would just offer, because people do, God, sitting up here at this age, there was a time when the belief was government employees make way less than private sector employees. And that's just not necessarily true anymore, nor does the private sector offer cost of living increases every year. I think philosophically being more in line with how people are paid, not just saying because we're a government, therefore spending tax money, we can do something differently. I wholeheartedly would support looking at 3-year cycles, recognizing also in the messaging here, nobody's getting a pay decrease here. The likelihood is when we look at this, and Janice, tell me if I'm incorrect, almost everybody's going to see some slight increase in pay.
Correct.
Yeah.
There are some.
Yeah.
That.
When they're absolutely at the high end of range and all that.
Correct.
Understood.
They're,
Yeah.
very high in the range. But again, that depends on what option we pick, how aggressive, I guess, we want to be.
That's right.
The other thing that we're working through that's been a little bit more challenging to us is the pay plan with police and fire. Because step plans are typically just considered tenure. If you have X number of years, this is where we want to be, this is where you would be. And what we're trying to find is a combined solution that includes performance in it. So maybe what it ends up looking like, we don't know yet, but that's the conversations we're having with our police and fire folks, is having the step increase be a reasonable percentage increase, which you'll see here. This is just an example. We don't have any numbers. We started everybody at $1, just for example purposes. So right now what we have is a 1.5% increase per step up until year 15. And then starting in year 15, that increase goes to 1%. This is just an example. And folks would go up a step by tenure, every year. So basically they would all be getting a 1.5 adjustment every year. And then based on performance, you can go up to an additional step, no more than 2 steps. And that way we give them the flexibility to be able to recognize good performance, not good, exceptional performance, but still be a sustainable and reasonable increase, and still make sure that they stay within the range. Because one of the things that we've done in the past, we have a 2.5 and then we have a range or a different rate per score. Well, then if we apply that to this, then why have a step plan? You'll have people all over the place. That way we keep a consistent number or salary number for these employees, and it's easier for us to budget moving forward because we know where they would be in
Right.
step 5 or 6. So for example, if we do the 1.5, then that means that up to year 15, employees who go above and beyond, have an exceptional performance evaluation, could go up 2 steps. That's a 3% increase every year that they would be eligible, which is it's more 0.5% more than what we have implemented the past 2 years, where our pool was 2.5. But this guarantees a 1.5 increase just based on tenure and recognizing that longevity with the city.
And that's very common with municipalities in the public sector, public safety sector. You'll find maybe the percentages to be a little bit more aggressive than what we've had on here as our example. But we're looking at, the longevity of how can we sustain this? If we put something higher in there, we don't want to get to year 5 and say, we can't do this, we can't budget for this, keep this pace up.
Yeah, and Janice, to that, going back my first year on council, when we looked at trend lines, and I remember Debbie Suggs going, this is not sustainable. I mean, this obviously needs to be weighed against this insistence in the community that we don't raise taxes, right? Because you can't outpace your ability to collect money. And we tend to build conservative budgets. So I'm guessing that this cycles back to Ways and Means and looks at the philosophy that's in place over time and either passes a sustainability test or doesn't.
Correct.
Yeah.
The other thing I wanted to mention about the step is right now you can see that it ends in year 25.
Yeah.
That's something that we've been discussing, do we want to extend that further and say, or keep it there and then have a policy of how are you then recognized for good performance and tenure past year 25? Because we do have police and fire posted in year 20, 25, 23 years. So what happens? They're in their minds, well, once
We're
I get to 25, I don't have any opportunity to grow. So we're talking through some options that we can implement or consider to respond to that concern, which is certainly valid. However, Evergreen did say, you don't want to spread it out too much because then it sort of becomes null. But that's just one of the things that we're still working through. And if y'all have any thoughts or ideas on that, let us know. The other thing I wanted to show you all is the pay plan summary. So you see here how we wanted to make sure that promotional opportunities make sense financially. So you can see here that the grade progression rate between positions and between ranks is 10% between corporal and sergeant, and then 15% increase through, all the way up to captain. Chief is not, the position of chief is not included in the step pay plan. He's included in the general. Same thing with the fire chief position. And then we try to maintain that same progression in the fire department ranking.
Philosophically, the step where you can increase your step by or get an extra step makes a lot of sense to me.
Okay,
So,
good.
right off the cuff, I personally like this direction a lot. Obviously the details of the numbers, we have to see
That's right.
the data. So I can look at this. This is thank you for laying this out this way. If this is the direction you need from us, I can say for my part, this direction I think makes a lot of sense. The one caveat is what feedback we have from police and fire on this.
Agreed.
So we met with police yesterday. They're on board. They really like this direction as well. and we have talked about this before, John, I remember maybe a year or two ago when we were talking about, do we want to separate the, increases and raises in performance? And some of the folks, in the police department said, we may be getting a more accurate performance evaluation if it's not tied to money. Because at the end of the day, we're human and, we know that we're standing in the middle of somebody's livelihood and making 2 versus 2.5%. So there's, there are pros and cons, and that's certainly a concern philosophically that we all have. We are working with Evergreen on a separate proposal for an evaluation tool. It's something that we tried to do last year with COVID. It was one of the projects that we had to rebudget for this year. So to me, the sustainability and the success of this project, depends on the confidence that we have on an accurate and sustainable evaluation tool. And that's what we'll be working on. Making it more objective, goal-oriented rather than highly subjective, where it's harder. So initially, those folks were saying, let's just do the step plan by year performance. It's always going to be a little murky, but I think we've kind of talked it through how important it is to be able to have an opportunity to recognize those folks that go above and beyond. If not, what's the incentive if you're making the same thing regardless?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Quick question. You say input from police and fire. What does that mean from senior level personnel? I'm just curious where the input, did we broad base, drill down into the departments to say this is what we're thinking and have some inclusion, or was it the top of the pecking order?
Meeting with sergeants and captains.
Okay.
The supervisor levels, and we'll do the same in every other department.
Yeah. Okay.
One of the other feedbacks is they really liked knowing where the pay was being.
Mhm.
That was what Evergreen was also saying. Also, was,
Yeah.
People want to know, I'm going to be making this starting, July 1 this year. One of the other things that we talked about is when the promotions happen, they won't be losing that stepping. So, if they're at year 5 and they get promoted to a detective officer area, they'll see that 10% and they'll stay in that 5 and then move across that grade
Okay.
going forward.
Thank you.
There's continuity in there, and you'll know that already ahead of time. So if they put in for a position and tested and, the potential of what they would.
And just one last thought that I wanted to add, when we talk about the cost of implementing this and sustainability, for years to come, we have to think too what the alternative is higher turnover, not being fully staffed means some kind of overtime. And the police and fire department, we need to be fully staffed. So if we ensure that we have competitive market, even maybe higher than market rates, it means that the likelihood of people leaving and going to taking other jobs or to a different department are lower. So that means our overall costs to deal with retention and turnover,
So Desiree and John, if I may, for the public's benefit, I think I know the answer to this, but 6 months training for a police officer. And that assumes we can get them into the academy, and they are eligible to leave after what period of time? Where they could be recruited out of,
as soon as they get out of the academy.
yeah. So I just want to offer that for everybody's benefit, that, what we don't want to become is the city that trains other police department or fire departments personnel. And we've looked at that going back the time I spent on council. And I have advocated and still advocate that we probably need to be more aggressive in police and fire, given the proximity of getting here for people that are living distances away. So just something to let both police and fire know that we are attentive to.
I'm going to ask for Ryan's input, but I think for this committee, my sense is that the direction, the philosophy behind the pay structure is what we need to bring to council, and really the numbers need to come from Ways and Means.
Mhm.
So without getting into the details. Obviously, the numbers help us understand what's going, so it's very helpful. But Ryan, I'd love to hear.
No, I think, I like this, and I think the employees would like it as well, the fact that they know what they're,
Mhm.
what it's gonna be year to year, because right now, it was up in the air every year, depending on what council got in place. Depending on whether people are doing COLAs or merits or both or combination. I think if we get to a policy where we have something like this step, with some type of, merit and yeah, it's people know what they're gonna make on which day.
That was
So,
the positive feedback that we got. from the police.
Mhm.
and that was the most negative feedback we
Yeah.
got from
Yeah.
from the staff, was not knowing or expecting something and not getting it.
Mhm.
Well,
Yeah.
Good.
Cool. So I think you have feedback on the police and fire philosophy on the first part on the options.
Mhm.
It feels like for your recommendation is really just think about those three. It's hard for me to give a huge reaction on the numbers. I'm guessing the top one is the lowest dollar impact, right? Just bringing everyone to minimum.
I'll give you all some ranges.
Okay, here we go. That's what
So the first one, I said 70 to 80, that's the minimum. The second two, penetration already includes that minimum. So it builds up from making sure everybody's up to the new minimum. The current range penetration, regardless of where you are in the range, that's between 450 and 500,000. One-time adjustment. And that's citywide.
Mhm.
We can, again, look at this in an implementation phase. If you want to say, let's do it in 2 years, take police and fire year 1, the rest in year 2, that's certainly an option, and one that will map out for you all. And then the other one is in the range of 300 and 380-ish.
Okay.
Got it.
That's the one that caps at midpoint.
Mhm.
And again, there are some of these positions that are a little bit out of whack, that we need to go back and look. But they're all, most employees. have
Yeah, I
overwhelmingly know
yeah, I would
what
just
to
ask
do.
for some separation of public safety from those last two options so
And
that
that's
we're,
how we're doing it.
yeah, okay.
And Police in one category, fire in the
Okay, so sorry, back to the previous comment. I don't know how y'all feel, but this doesn't feel like a philosophical discussion. It feels like a math discussion, a budget discussion.
totally agree, John.
Because really we want to get people up as fairly and as highly as possible. So I don't want to kick the can, but it feels like a full Ways and Means discussion on this area. We want competitive pay. So whatever we can do from a budget perspective to get there, I think is what we want.
Yeah.
Maybe that's the philosophy coming from personnel.
Yeah, like Desiree and I were talking, this would be really hard to go through this exercise and go, well, we're just not going to do anything.
That's the only, I was going to say earlier, that's the only option that's not on the table, that's not on here, is leave it as it is.
We've done that.
And we talked about
Yeah.
that before. I will say, I went out on a limb and said, we don't really need to do this, because the city had done it in a long time. To me, it's the amount of work. I mean, we're working with PhD level folks. I mean, just the amount of work that's being dedicated to this is impressive. I just don't think that.
It's not an option.
That's what's obvious. You look at those numbers, you're like, okay, we should have done something years ago. Like we're a little slow. So let's try to get on it. So I don't know do you need any
I don't need any
motions, any-
motions. At this point, we wanted to get some feedback. Y'all are exactly where we are too, in the department heads, in terms of the options that we want to see map out. That'll be our next step. And we can have, I'm sure we'll
Timeframe?
have this discussion next month, the Ways and Means. We have Ways and Means tonight.
Mhm.
We're not ready to bring this out to tonight.
So
we'll-
just process question, John, will we have another personnel discussion before it goes to Ways and
Yes.
Means?
Yes, next month.
Good. Yeah. So you're on a pretty aggressive timeline, is what I'm getting at.
Well, I don't know if we'll be ready.
When's the
for
next
full
personnel?
first
Tuesday after Labor Day?
Yeah, September 7th.
Yeah, that's why I'm asking that
Yeah,
question.
because this is late.
That's right.
Correct. Well, I don't think that we'll get to a point where it's ready for full implementation and approval by the end of September, but I think our goal of having it done in October is more reasonable.
Thank you.
Any other?
Nope.
Nope. Good.
Good
Thank you.
Good work.
Good.
Looking
Good work.
good.
Thank you,
it's worth the time and effort. Great. Moving on to second item in old business, consideration of appointments for the Environmental Advisory Committee. And I know Desiree, you've done some work and done some more digging into the candidates. So I'll well, for the public's sake, last meeting, we had this massive, 27 applicants for 9 positions. And we realized we were missing some information about demographics and wanted this city, we directed staff to come back and kind of bucket a few different categories of candidates. And I know we want to talk about this, and this is something we have on executive session. We have another item in executive session. Do we want to punt this?
To the end.
To the end?
Okay.
Okay.
Do we need to?
Do we need a motion for that? We just discussed
I
it.
don't think so.
Okay.
It's up, they're both on the agenda. We discussed it.
Yeah.
Cool. Moving on to new business, item A, discussion and consideration of nominations for Leola Hamberry Award. This is supposed to be an annual award that was made possible through an endowment from Leola Hamberry, a former city council member who really wanted to reward city workers who are just exceptional. And I know, again, this is on our, because there's privacy concerns. We discussed this in executive sessions because nominations are made anonymously. So we will pick this up in executive session and make some more announcements on that afterwards. So I'm going to move on to new business item B, discussion of upcoming vacancies in boards and commissions. And Desiree, I'll hand it off to you, please.
Yes, so this is. A number of vacancies that will expire in 2021, December 31st, 2021. I included in the packet a one-pager.
Mhm.
Trying to pull it up, so I can tell you exactly how many. Oh, no, I
8.
emailed it to you all.
There's 8 vacancies
There's 8 vacancies,
Yeah.
4 planning commission, 2
in zoning.
BOZA, and 2 political board of appeals. Y'all recall personnel committee a couple of years ago looked at establishing a sort of a consistent process for getting these vacancies or these appointments considered. We have certainly, as you can see from the environmental advisory committee response, a lot of people that want to be considered for some of these positions. And in the past, the city just reappointed folks even past 6, 8, 10 terms sometimes. The personnel committee had made some type of, not necessarily a policy decision, but a recommendation that you would all reconsider applicants after 2 terms, 2 consecutive terms. And I wanted to confirm if that was still the case with with this committee and this council, and basically provide some guidance to us. We have made advertisements through the local newspaper, social media, the website, requesting people who are interested to submit an application. We've only received 1 for the planning commission, so not a whole lot of response so far. The deadline for those applications to come in is end of this month, August 30th, with the idea that it gives you all a couple of months to consider before making nominations to council in November. So that's where we are. We've made the notifications, accepting applications, and then you all would be deciding what to do with some of these folks that are interested in being reappointed. Just a thought with planning commission, there are a handful of members there that were selected to fill unexpired terms last year. Some of these folks have not even completed a full 2 years. So those you all may consider just reappointing those based on that decision. They recently went through the application process and were selected. So that's, again.
Let me, if you don't mind, just because I was more or less the champion of that policy, so I'll give my perspective on it. We had a lot of frustration from folks in the community who felt like any commission was a lifetime appointment, and that in effect it was. If someone said I'm going to keep serving forever, that's fine. And councils were changing over, and obviously we have to rerun for election every year that we want to we want to continue serving. And we felt like, okay, we know that it's important that there's some degree of longevity and continuity on these commissions because that's incredibly valuable and helpful. We don't want to lose that, but at the same time, we also don't want the broader community to feel like, well, I don't have an opportunity to serve because we have a set of lifetime appointments in these boards and commissions. So we tried to come to some middle ground that honored both sides of that kind of that debate. And this is what we came up with. Again, every system, every process is going to be imperfect. Felt like this was the best way to accomplish both of those goals. The spirit of that is, you have a council who interviews candidates, and then that same council more or less is still on board throughout those 2 terms of the individuals on commission. And so they've had a chance probably to interview and interact with those folks. You may have council members that come into a position who are asked to appoint folks that they've really not engaged with or interviewed. And that was kind of also part of the spirit. So with regard to the unexpired terms, I'll start with that one. I think it's the easiest. The spirit is until someone has served 2 terms or been appointed essentially twice, they shouldn't necessarily have to reapply and re-interview and do those things. They should be able to say, hey, I'd like to continue serving. So I would say, I don't know how many of those 4 spots on planning commission are, 2 of those are people who could raise their hand and say, hey, I'd like to reserve. And 2 of them have served for 2 or more consecutive terms. And so they would need to reapply and re-interview and be on the same page as anybody else, except for the fact that they have the experience. They have a leg up, I would say, on everyone else because of the experience that they have. So that's in essence the policy, that the unofficial, there's no code, there's nothing behind it. It came out of a discussion in personnel committee a couple of years ago. That's the policy that we introduced. I obviously am a fan of it. I would like to move forward, but I'm happy to entertain any improvements to that.
I don't think there are improved. The only point of clarity is these unexpired terms. Do we need to do something differently to let those individuals, you said there's 4, that if you wish to remain because you're serving partial terms, that you have that opportunity? Is there anything we need to clarify on that? Because John, I agree with you 100%. I mean, well said.
I think they just need to know, like, hey, you signed up for a term that expired December 31st, 2021. If you'd like to stay on for another 3 years, you may. And 2
years.
Thank you. Sorry, 2 years.
That would apply to Marty Brown and Scott Peters. We appointed last year to fill unexpired terms, and then they're going to serve for 2 or more. So those would be the ones that we will notify. Your term is up for expires at the end of this year. Certainly, able to submit a new application if you continue to be interested, and then treat them just like any new application.
Do we know, we haven't reached out to any of these folks yet to indicate whether or not they want to stay on, or because right now we don't know.
Right. We might be filling forces.
Yes, right. But, okay. I think,
We'll be doing those communications.
Okay, perfect.
All right, that's it.
Okay, cool. And the last item in new business is discussion of RFP for the judge, city prosecutor, and public defender.
So this is something that has been talked about before. I've been asked, what's the process that the city has followed in the past to select the city prosecutor or public defender. The current municipal judge was appointed by council about 14, 15 years ago. And the city prosecutor was hired by the former city administrator about 12 years ago. City prosecutor is not a code, there's no process in the code specifically, so it would fall on the city administrator to make a selection to serve in that role. But the municipal judge, it is a role that's appointed for council for a 2-year term. That term expires at the end of this year. We have been seeing a lot of chatter from other communities that go through this process every 2 to 4 years. They just request for review proposals. Well, the city could consider issuing a request for proposals if that's what this committee and council wants to do. It should not be seen as a negative reflection on any of the services that have been provided. It's just a best practice to have equal opportunity, open and transparent procurement process for services. And if that's what the to, we can certainly move forward and do that, issue an RFP for all these three services, and then council or the personnel committee can interview the candidates and make a recommendation. The code doesn't necessarily assign or task the personnel committee for interviewing judges. That's something that, you know, the rest of council wants to do, just like boards and commissions, and assign you all to do that. Or it could be full council interviewing a municipal judge. Certainly, you know, depending on, you know, what this council wants to do, because there's really no guidance in the code, and the way that it's been done in the past, you know, again, it's been a long time. I don't think that at that time the city ever issued a request for proposals for any of these, and it's part of how I do, you know, how I conduct my work. It's just again, a best practice, something that I recommend for everything, even if it's not required in the code. So certainly an option. I just wanted to discuss that because that appointment comes up by December.
Would you recommend it coming through personnel committee?
Well, I put it in personnel committee just because, you know, consistent to boards and commissions. It's one more step for discussion. Again, it's not spelled out in the code that y'all assume this role unless city council
So let me,
tasks you with that.
always thinking timelines.
Yeah.
So this personnel committee will dissolve by the end of the year, at a time when you're appointing and going through an RFP process, right? So the way we move forward is council members carrying forward and council elect,
Yes.
right? So are we not left in that process with a void from November to January in how you would put forth a candidate for the judge, knowing that you've got to make that appointment in January, right? So
That's what makes this year
Yeah.
so tricky, because
that's why I wanted to offer that.
and that is the same process for any appointment.
Yeah.
So boards and commissions, standing
Yep.
committees, they're only made, nominations are made by those who carry over and the council elect. I would say that y'all could still go through the process and evaluate and interview somebody and make a recommendation. But the the official nominations could only be presented by those that carry over or elect before they're sworn in that December special meeting
Well,
or early December.
I'm just acknowledging with the potential that none of us are in that go forward position. That potential exists, right? So all I'm saying is we have to deal with the reality of how would the process work. And by the way, I'm all in favor of doing RFPs just because that's, I'm kind of wired that way also. And I don't know that we need any action out of this, John, but an acknowledgement of the conundrum we have sitting up here as a personnel committee.
Well, I'm sorry, Brian.
No, go ahead.
Okay, we did the city attorney and assistant attorney as full counsel, right? I don't know, maybe I'm just lumping all the legal stuff together, but for the same timeline reason, it seems like we're gonna be able to move faster by getting it out of committee and into full council faster. So I'm in favor of the RFP as well. But I don't know that it necessarily needs to sit with this committee unless it's gonna go to council anyway. Oh, yeah, we did, didn't we? Yeah.
That's why I was looking at
I mean, we could do that.
Yeah.
but
It just, with the timeline, it seems like not an unnecessary, but yes, unnecessary, but a nice to have, an unnecessary, but nice to have.
Well, and, you know, I'll evaluate those, you know, with the clerk, you know, would definitely be involved, and I can make a recommendation to council. We get to a point where, yeah, our hands are tied. We'll just go through an objective
Okay.
evaluation of those applicants and proposals. So that's,
So we don't need any votes, just guidance, right?
All right, well, that concludes new business. Next item is miscellaneous business. We have, our next meeting is currently scheduled for 9 a.m. Tuesday, September the 7th. Randy brought up the timeline with evergreening. I didn't see any hesitation on the staff side. Is that still the case?
there might be some next week.
Okay, subject to change based on,
We can change it to the following Tuesday, you know, just recognizing that Monday, I'm actually gonna out that Monday, Tuesday morning. So if we can move it for the 14th, that would.
I mean,
I think everyone's going to be out Monday. You're saying you're going to be out Monday the 6th.
The Monday of Tuesday the 7th.
Right, it's Monday the 6th, Labor Day.
Yeah.
so you're saying the 14th?
You're going to be out Monday, the Tuesday morning as well. I'm sorry.
But we could do it on the 14th and still have a week before the next Ways and Means.
That's okay with me.
That's fine with me. Does that work for you, Ryan?
All
All right, so next meeting date is actually 9 a.m. Tuesday, September the 14th. Got it? And just one quick note on miscellaneous business. One thing we discussed in previous personnel committee meetings was succession planning. We had a really thick agenda this week. And also staff, I know that Desiree is working with the department heads to put plans in place. So there is work being done on the background. There weren't really any discussion items to really add here. So just a note for the committee that work is being done on succession plans at the department level and presumably either next month, sometime before either or September or October, we'll see something.
Okay.
Cool. Well, the next item is executive session. And in accordance with South Carolina Code Section 30-4-70A1 to discuss personnel matters and applications for the Environmental Advisory Committee and nominations for the Leola Hanbury Award. I'd like to make a motion that we go into executive session. Upon returning to open session, the committee may take action on matters discussed in executive session, but no decisions will be made there.
So move.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Are we? Did you give Randy stuff to hand to us?
I'm sorry?
Randy,
Yeah.
Did you give Randy stuff that he was supposed to pass to us?
I did.